Hello and welcome to chapter 2 of the book of Daniel from our published book called The Prophet from Babylon, Understanding the Book of Daniel. Daniel is the foundation stone of all end-time prophecy. And here in chapter 2, we get a very important component of that foundation stone. This chapter is called Nebuchadnezzar's Dream, or Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar was a great king, not necessarily in character or kindness or goodness, but in the magnitude of his influence, not only in his realm, but also in history. In fact, we think that chapter 4 of the book of Daniel is written, or at least dictated by Nebuchadnezzar. It's said in the first person, talking about himself and his realm. Now, he had a dream that troubled him so much that he summoned the astrologers and the wise men of Babylon, which included Daniel and his 3 friends. And he says, I have dreamt this dream. Can you tell me what it is and then tell me the interpretation? Call this mission impossible. It's one thing to interpret a dream. It's another thing to have to tell what the dream is first and then interpret it. Nobody's ever asked something like that, but who said Nebuchadnezzar was reasonable? In fact, if you want tips on how to handle a difficult person, watch how Daniel deals with Nebuchadnezzar. He should have had his head lopped off, but instead, because of the grace of God on Daniel's life, he came out on top. So basically, the dream was this. Nebuchadnezzar saw a multi-metalled statue. In other words, multiple metals in the statue, and each one of these metals stood for an ancient realm. All of these having a role to play in the history of the people of the Bible, namely the Jewish people. The statue began with a head of gold, and the head of gold was the Babylonian Empire, with Nebuchadnezzar as the head of the head of gold. Going downward and less costly would be the arms and chest of silver. Arms and chest of silver represented the successor state to the Babylonian Empire, namely Medo-Persia. Think of Cyrus the Great, Darius, Ahasuerus, husband of Esther, and so on. Then you have the belly and thigh of bronze, and this represents the Hellenistic or Greek Empire first instituted by Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC. And then we have the legs of iron, feet of iron and clay. This represents what we will now call the Imperial Empire. And who is this 4th empire? It is also alluded to in chapters 7 and chapters 8, but by different titles. Who is it? Now, traditionally, the interpretation is that the 4th empire represents the Roman Empire, hence imperial. A revived Roman Empire is the phrase that has been used probably for centuries to describe the last days world empire. And bear in mind, Nebuchadnezzar's statue is speaking of all the empires and realms from the time of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar and the head of gold all the way to the coming of Christ. What I haven't mentioned before we get into the identity of the 4th empire is the stone cut out of the mountain without hands. It hits this statue, and saying that it's cut without hands means it's of divine origin. Totally destroys the statue. It crumbles into a pile of dust. The wind comes, blows the dust away, so that you wouldn't even know there were any empires in the world. Then the stone, all by itself, goes into a great mountain and fills the whole earth. Basically, this is the Messianic kingdom or the kingdom of Christ. Now, the identity of the 4th empire is, in my opinion, debatable. Is it revived Rome? Or could it be the Roman Empire in the east, namely Constantinople, Istanbul, Ottoman Empire, raised from the dead? There is a case for the latter, especially when you read the fearsome descriptions given and some of the activities happening in modern Turkey today. At the very least, watch Turkey and what happens to it in the coming days. It could be a fulfillment of prophecy. But whatever the case may be, Nebuchadnezzar's statue is a wonderful object lesson of the kingdoms of this world being replaced by the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, as it says in Revelation chapter 11, verse 15. And Revelation, the book, is the Siamese twin to the book of Daniel.